Welcome everybody. This is our second our second speaker series that we've had in kind of our dynamic talks with various manufacturers. We're very lucky today to have the ZEISS team on. Snehal Patel is going to be leading a conversation in the ZEISS Supreme Radiance Lenses, which have lots of buzz around them and lots of exciting people who are reaching out using their lenses on really cool productions. He's joined by Stephen Balsey and Tony Wisniewski. And we have our team here, and we're really excited to just kind of talk about what the new products are and why they're important, and what creative control that gives to the end user who's ultimately creating this awesome content that we've all been consuming over the last 6 weeks, and it feels like almost an eternity now. But we're very excited to be here. On our side, I'm Austin Rios. I'm a partner with Dynamic, and I'm a partner with Brandon in Dynamic Rentals. We have our partner in the UK, Tom Smith, our Chief Technology Officer, Sean Sims. We are joined by our Director of Marketing, Anna Schmidt, and one of our technicians, Coda Aranda, who's in Atlanta, Georgia today. So we're very excited. We're very excited for the conversation. Snehal is going to give us a presentation, and then we're going to be opening it up for questions. We're live on YouTube. We're live on Facebook. And a couple of our other social avenues. So any way you're watching this, if you put in a chat with a question, we'll do our best to try to answer it and bring it up. But we're very, very excited for this. Brandon, want to hand it off to you. Anything else you'd like to add before Snehal gets started?
Absolutely. I just want to say this is a fantastic opportunity for both companies, Dynamic and ZEISS. We've worked together for the past few years. Obviously, we're buying your lenses. With Dynamic being a sub-rental only company, it's really allowed us to get the ZEISS brand and the ZEISS lenses out to our customers, the rental houses. So we're really looking forward to this, and thanks for popping on. Without further ado, Snehal, if you want to kind of jump in and, show us what you have for us.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. I really appreciate the forum. It's great because we're going to talk about, how we develop this new lens technology in the Supreme Prime Radiance lenses. And it's something that's really exciting. Like you mentioned, Dynamic already rents a bunch of our lenses. In fact, our full portfolio of cinema lenses that are current right now, the CP3s, Supreme Primes, and you already have the Supreme Prime Radiance on order. So you are already, making available to your customers this product. And this is something for the masses. We were talking a little bit before we started, and you were asking the question about, who is this lens for? And really the Supreme Prime Radiance is for everybody. It's a version of the Supremes that has an interesting look, different characteristics. We're going to talk about how that happened to come together. But aside from that, it's really an experiment in what kind of paintbrush cinematographers are looking for. They're looking for choices. And in full frame, we were kind of limited with choices. And now we have a few more, and a couple from ZEISS that are really interesting in the Supreme Primes and the Supreme Prime Radiance. So I can jump right into it and start the presentation. I'll go ahead and share my screen so you can all see what's going on here. So this is the presentation about the Supreme Prime Radiance lens development, and we're going to kind of quickly go through it and then leave time for questions and answers. And there's already some questions from the team. So I want to thank, first of all, Dr. Benjamin Volker, because he actually put this presentation together and we've enhanced it a little bit. He's the one that researched the whole flare characteristics and where they come from, and how to create flares in new lenses. And the thing is, he was hired just less than a decade ago to actually get rid of flares. Like, that was his job when he started at ZEISS, is get rid of ghosting, but keep the lens as neutral as possible. Because when you use anti-reflective coatings to get rid of flare characteristics, you have to also maintain your color balance as well. So that was his job, and now we tasked him with creating flares. So it's really interesting. So let's talk about, where does a flare come from? When people say flare, it's actually a bunch of different things mixed together, right? So if in this image right here, we see a sunlight exposing two astronauts and the Earth, and we see a flare characteristic. So this is an interaction between the point source of light, the sun, and the optics, the glass. Now, if this was a theoretical, basically infinitely large iris with no glass involved, and we were there in real life looking at this picture, we wouldn't see these reflections because there's no optics between us and the sun. So we would just see the sun. We would see the the exposure onto the planet and onto the astronauts, but we wouldn't see the reflecting going around, because what happens in an ideal situation without any reflections happening, light passes through all the different lens elements of your lens design and comes out the back end and then is exposed on the film plane or the sensor plane. So in an ideal situation, you wouldn't have, if you didn't have your point source of light and you just had exposed objects, the light would just travel normally through the lenses, and just like the lenses are designed to do. This is a light path that we're seeing with the yellow dotted lines and the gray lines. These are light paths, and normally a point of a reality would go through this path and then end up on the other side. And that's what you're looking for in an ideal situation. But with the addition of the sun, so an ideal situation, again, your exposed planet, your exposed astronauts, nothing else, okay? But we add the sun, so this complicates things, because when you talk about optical path, now it's going to have an effect on the optical path. So again, on the top right, you're seeing in an ideal situation with no glass involved, I would literally just see the sun, and I would see the Earth exposed, and I would see the astronauts exposed, but nothing else. But in reality, when it hits the glass, this is not going to be possible, because this might be happening in the real world, but when you have glass involved, this is actually what happens with the interaction with the glass, okay? So this is where flares come from, is the interaction between optics and everything else that's happening in the lens itself and the real world. Not, an ideal world, again, it would be like this. You would see the sun and you would see everything exposed correctly, but here it is with the interaction with the glass. So what is happening? There's actually multiple aspects of that flare. Okay, we're going to examine the four different pieces. The first piece is your ghosting itself, what we call ghosting. This is the light reflected off of multiple optical elements, and light can be reflected more than once, bouncing around inside, and maybe not a lot of light, but it could be a little bit of light, and that little bit of light reflecting around can cause a small ghost, and a lot of light bouncing around will cause a big ghost. And there's multiple paths, so it's not like there's just one path where there's a reflection going on and you see just one object. You see multiple objects being illuminated, and then you see multiple shapes at the end, that are caused by the flare. So that's ghosting. That's the first aspect of where the flare characteristic comes from. And this outline right here is showing you ghosting. Okay, so this is actually inside this oval shape, this yellow shape right here. You're seeing what happens when you reflect glass inside the lens design itself. When the glass is reflecting different types of light, that's what it does. The second aspect of it is when light scatters as it hits mechanical surfaces, and this is called stray light. And that also bounces around. It scatters when it hits the metal object, let's say, and turns into multiple shapes. Instead of one line, it turns into 3 or 4 lines of things. And that also causes the shape itself. And here we see, if you circle it, this is kind of like the lens barrel. And this could be at different sizes. Like in some flare characteristics of certain lenses, that lens barrel shape would be bigger. In others, it would be smaller. It just depends on the lens. But you would basically see the outline. And if I was able to pan this lens, you could see that barrel shape kind of following, as you move. And that shape is caused by the metallic surfaces inside. So nowadays, today, we try our darndest to use the darkest matte black finish paint to stop this from happening, okay? But, in older lenses, you're going to see more of this. You're going to see exposed mechanical surfaces inside a lens that will reflect. And then the more reflective it is, the more distinct that shape is going to be. And the third thing is light scattered on polished optical surfaces. Well, what does that mean? Well, we're all shooting on digital sensors nowadays, and they're silicone wafers. And a lot of times they have a piece of glass in front of the silicone wafer, which is a low pass filter. And that low pass filter is a piece of glass, so it also can reflect back certain light. And that's something that we can't control as lens manufacturers. Once you project an image onto the sensor, then it's the camera manufacturer that now has control over what that light is going to do before it hits the sensor. So some people make low pass filters that are very reflective, and that actually causes a different shape altogether inside the lens. So around the point source of light, you see this halo, kind of like a bluish, greenish halo around it. That is actually caused by the low pass filter itself. And another thing that can cause it is the shape of even the anti-moire filter that's a part of the low pass filter can have straight lines, and that can also cause like an egg crate type of shape as well. And you see that with the red cameras on certain low pass filters that they have. You can clearly see a distinct shape that you can't see on any other camera system. So all this is caused by light reflecting off of the low pass filter. And then the fourth piece is the diffraction caused by the iris itself. So as you close down the iris or open the iris, you have this kind of star pattern that is created. The more closed down the iris is, the higher your t-stop, the more the star pattern you see, and the more open your iris is, the lower the t-stop, the less of this diffraction you see with the star pattern. So that all four of those things together is actually what we call flares, okay? And the flares are very common, but they can change depending on what color light it is, where the light source is in the frame. Is it, off to the side? Is it in the middle? Is it the top? Is it the bottom? How intense is it? What is the color of that light? A lot of that can have an effect on the ultimate end product of what the flare is, right? So, but flares are very common, and people use them creatively. So that's why, part of the reason why people harken back to vintage lenses, older lens designs, is because some of these flare characteristics caused by some of the less perfect designs or the less perfect anti-reflective coatings of older lenses. And that's quite frankly, what's happening. So how do you use that to tell a story? Well, you can manipulate the flare characteristics by messing with the anti-reflective coating, because the anti-reflective coating is what results in, at the end of the day, all those pieces of those flare characteristics we talked about, all that intensity, everything can be controlled by anti-reflective coatings. So what are anti-reflective coatings? Well, on the left, you see a coating on the front of a element down. So if you're looking at my screen right here, you can see how lens elements stack inside a lens design. There's many lens elements inside. But if you coat one side with anti-reflective coating and flip it around, you'll be able to see light transmitted well through it without a lot of light reflecting back out. So you have a very good quality image coming through. I have another example of that. With and without coating is this filter. So I'm just going to stop sharing for just a second so you can see a full screen of my of me talking. So if you have me talking and you can see me now, there, right there, you can see that this is anti-reflective coating on one side and no anti-reflective coating on the other. And the side with the no anti-reflective coating, you can't see my eye when the light source is being reflected back, and the other side you can. So this is showing you exactly how anti-reflective coatings work. Normally, you want to transmit light as good as possible and have as neutral of an image as possible. You notice that normally, if I move this without pointing at the light source, if I move this filter from in front of my face shouldn't change any color. As I have this filter in front of me, it should stay the same. And on both sides, the anti-reflective coated side or the one without the anti-reflective coating, there's not really a color shift that you can notice without, really using a microscope. But here, as soon as the light source is involved, you can see that there's some, even on the side with the anti-reflective coating, there's a little bit of pushback, a little bit of light, because it's directly coming in, that's going back out. Okay, slight bit, but not that much. That is the sign of a good coatings on your lens. So and now let's go back to the presentation with the coatings. So that's with and without the coating, right? So what effect does that have? Well, if you take this example where none of the lens elements were coated in this 21 millimeter lens, here's examples you've seen with and without coating. Without a coating, it just basically all your contrast goes away. Your exposure is a lot less than before because a lot of light is being reflected out instead of passing all the way through the lens. And basically you just don't get a very nice image with a lot of saturation or colors or accuracy, because a lot of light is getting bounced around and reflected inside and causing all these flare characteristics. And then what we did was, back in 1935, we started developing, how do we stop this enter this reflection from going around. Okay, what can we do to stop that from happening? So we created, got a patent in 1935. In 1940s, we used single layer coating to stop anti-reflective, or to create anti-reflective coatings to stop the light from bouncing around. And then in the 1950s, we started using multi-layer coatings. And that is because of the spectrum of light that we were able to stop this anti-reflective coating from affecting. And I'll show you that in just a second. But basically, you should know that the T-star coatings that we're talking about, and and even the sample that I showed you, these evolve from time to time. So as time goes on, year to year, we're getting better at creating anti-reflective coatings. And again, each time you have a multi-layer anti-reflective coating, it's specific for each type of glass, its curvature, its intensity, and its glass type. So even though you might want the same effect at the end of the day, an anti-reflective coating and all the lens elements, maybe all of these elements have slightly different formulation of coating to make sure that at the end of the day, they all behave the same. So this is a very important aspect of multi-layer coatings, is that it's not the same. You don't just take the spray and spray it on everything. You have to customize it. So there's a lot of work that goes into it. So let's discuss like with and without coating. If the glass doesn't have coating, that means you might be reflecting 9, 10, 11, 12% of your light back. And that's each element inside. So that really reflects a lot inside and starts bouncing around inside, right? So uncoated glass really is just reflecting a ton of light back out. And even if it gets past the first element, it's now going to start reflecting on the second element and third element. And so it'll keep reflecting back and forth. And you really just ghost your image and really create these flares that just overpower everything. Okay. So that's one aspect of what can happen. What you can do is with a single layer of anti-reflective coating, you might be able to get one band of wavelengths of light, of visible light, and cut the reflection quite a bit, but you might not be able to get all the other bands of light. So in this case, with a single layer of coating, we're able to cut a pretty good layers of bandwidth in the blue and the green region, but we're not able to cut the reflections on the orange and the purple region, which would mean that those wavelengths of light would still keep reflecting and you would see those clearly, and they would cause ghosts and colors because you're able to only cut a certain narrow band. But what we try to do with T-star coating and the multi-layer, the star part of the T coating, is that now we try to use multi-layers of coating to cut as much of the visible spectrum as possible. And that way you have the most neutral look as possible. And again, depending on the lens element, you might have to modify that formulation depending on how powerful that lens element is, what type of glass is being used, all these other factors to try to get this even as possible. And as we evolve, like our Supreme Prime lenses are even better at doing anti-reflective coating than master primes and master anamorphics, because it's not that you can't create a master prime lens today. You can, and we can give it a new T-star coating, but that wouldn't be right. What we do is whatever formulation of coating we use for the first unit that was produced, it's the same formulation we're going to use now. So any master prime that was created 9 years ago will have the same formulation of coatings that we create today, because we don't want to change the look of the lens. But now if we create a Supreme Prime new line of lens, now we can say, okay, well, we're going to go harder and create something a little bit more better at stopping light. So just imagine that it evolves over the years. And we found that we can modify it. So we can say, well, why don't we pick narrow bands of light to not treat and allow that to reflect around, but we'll cut everything else off. And that's exactly what is happening in the radiance lenses, is that we're choosing, and I'll explain why we're choosing it later, but we're choosing this narrow band of blue light to reflect around to cause these ghosts and flare characteristics, but we're doing good anti-reflective coating on every other band of light. And this narrow band of light then results in these blue flare characteristics. So you can be creative with it. So we found that with these anti-reflective coatings, we can be creative with the results. So, and of course, you have to understand, you can't just go around uncoating stuff, because every optical service loses transmission due to some kind of reflectivity, even with anti-reflective coatings. But if you decide to like uncoat elements, it does have a detrimental effect. One, you have ghosting all over the place that's uncontrolled, and it's just going to easily light up. Even if the light source is way tangential on the outside, just a little bit of light will light up that element. And also, every time you uncoat a lens, you are now no longer making sure all the light transmits correctly. So you're going to start losing t-stops. So if you only in this specific design, in the Supreme Prime 21mm design, it has 16 lenses and 14 elements, right? So if you did uncoat 2 of those, front and rear, you're already dropping down from T15 to T17. Okay, this is completely uncoated, not special, differently coated, but just uncoated altogether. 50% of the glass, if 50% of the elements were uncoated, you would drop down to around T21. And if you completely uncoated everything, you'd be at T29. So just keep that in mind, that you uncoated does mean you lose exposure, okay? And you have all these other detriments, like small, little tiny source of light can really wash out your whole image and just veil the whole image with an uncoated lens. And you really struggle to get good saturation, good colors, and good contrast with an uncoated lens. And if you have a point source of light, it's going to just flare up really, really quickly. So this is the stuff that we wanted to avoid. This is not what we wanted for the Radiance lenses. We wanted something a little bit more controlled, okay? A little bit different. So how did we go about getting there? Okay, so now we know that we can use anti-reflective coatings to cause flare characteristics. We know that we don't want an uncoated lens. So what about the rest of it? Well, we have to listen to what cinematographers want. They want more character, right? And they want a look that they're seeing in some of this older glass, K35, Super Speed, Super Baltars, Cook Speed Panchros. The only thing is, at the end of the day, there's 2 limitations. One, a lot of these lenses you have to use with a Super 35 size sensor, so you can't use it in full frame. And full frame really is a new type of cinematography that people want to try. And the second thing is, a lot of the older lenses are unreliable, that they're going to have the problem that they're just not going to live up in a rental house environment, and they're going to require a lot more servicing, a lot more care, and probably won't just mechanically do the kinds of things you can do with a modern lens. So we really needed to think of a way to create a modern lens that had a special look that could fit the bill for full frame, okay? And we knew that when we put out the Supreme Primes, that they were a clean version, and many, many cinematographers are gonna love the Supreme Primes because of their cleanliness, because of their look, but there are gonna be subsets of cinematographers and jobs that a lot of cinematographers do that they're gonna require a look. So we did our research, and this is a shot of, you know, our Benjamin there in the striped shirt at Keslow, recording the characteristics of many different types of lenses that cinematographers find pleasing, to kind of come up with an idea of what flare characteristics do people like, okay, and identifying it, saying, okay, they like blue characteristics, they like when the flare is stacked like this, but they also like it when the lens still has a good contrast range and still can expose really well. So all those different things were taken into account, and we consider the intensity of the flare and light shapes, the color, the shape of it, the behavior when you stop down the lens versus when you're wide open, the position of the frame, does it change as the light source moves across the frame, what happens? And then the overall effect on the contrast, like we talked about, does it wash everything out? Or, you know, can you still see a lot of contrast in colors? And then you have to decide, all right, what do we want for the radiance? Well, we can't just uncoat the lens. We talked about that. But what we want to do is create a fresh look, a clean look that's our own, consistent over the entire lens family. So if we have different focal lengths of lenses, they should all have similar flare characteristics. It should be controllable in the sense of, you don't want just stray light lighting it up. You really want a concerted, concentrated point source of light that creates the flare characteristics. That way it's controllable. So if you flag it off, you don't have to worry about it. Right amount of intensity. You don't want it too veiling to cover everything, but you want it to be significant, and very low loss of light transmission, so you're still T15. And then what we did is we said, okay, we know that we can choose different elements inside these lens designs to coat with this different look. And let's see if we can create an anti-reflective coating where we bounce around this blue characteristic. How many lens elements do we have to coat inside this design to get there? The funny thing is, depending on how many elements of treatment you do, you can create all kinds of different ghosts that might be too much or overwhelming. So let's say for the Supreme Prime 21mm lens, for example, we chose 6 surfaces, okay? And those are 6 surfaces out of 14 lens elements that have 2 sides each, right? So out of 28 different surfaces, 6 surfaces were chosen. But even with 6 surfaces chosen, depending on which one of those 28 you're using, 6 out of 28, you could have over 200 million combinations of looks that you can create. So really what we needed is a supercomputer to go back and simulate all the different kind of characteristics and looks that can be created with each different lens element being coated differently, what ghost or flare is going to be created because of that, and then choose, which one of those combinations we're going to use. So the supercomputer was able to help Benjamin narrow down, and luckily he didn't have to go through 200 million designs, but because he was able to specify, like, look, I want these kinds of shapes and this kind of look, he was able to narrow down which elements would do this. And the supercomputer was able to tell him hundreds of different combinations, or maybe thousands. And he kept narrowing it down and saying, well, these are the shapes we want. This is where the shape should be in relation to the frame if the light source is here. And so then figuring it out, he was able to say, okay, well, let's try this stack of lens elements. Okay. And then you have to figure out not just which stack of lens elements, but also the formulation of the coatings. Because remember, I told you that depending on the anti-reflective coating on that specific element, it can give a different color or different shape or different intensity. So he had to figure out also which combinations of which amount of coating and what type of coating on each element can we get to make them all look the same. So once we figure out the shapes and the sizes that we wanted, the next thing is, how do we get the exact color rendition? And then finally narrow it down to these simulations where it's the exact blue that we want, it's the exact shape, and you can see that with the different t-stops of these lenses, the shape remains relatively similar between all of these focal lengths. So it's a lot of work to get here, but luckily we didn't have to create thousands of real prototypes. So that is the trick, is that before 2015, we couldn't do this. It wouldn't have even been possible, okay, for just 5 years ago to be able to do this. But now that we have the supercomputing technology and Dr. Volker's kind of research and development and his know-how, we're able to use these supercomputers to render the ghosts. And what was a tool to actually help prevent ghosts, we're now using as a tool to create ghosts and figure out what ghosts we want and what shape and size. And after this simulation is done, they actually created 3 or 4 prototypes per focal length with slight variations to make sure that we're getting the same result. And here you go. Here's a Supreme Prime Radiance 35 prototype on the left, and it's shot with a real light source. And on the right, you see a simulation that was used to create this look. And you see the look is very, very similar between the two. So you know that whatever was created in the simulation, we were creating now in the real world with actual prototypes. And then you could see through all the different focal lengths from 21 to 100, all the different shapes that are happening at T15, T28, and T56. And just again, imagine all we had to do was create 3 or 4 prototypes per focal length. So it's just 7 times 4. That's it. We did not have to do thousands upon thousands of prototypes, because if we did, we would have stopped at some point. At some point, you would have just given up, because you would have just kept making prototypes and you would have never have gotten very, very close to getting the exact color you wanted. You would have just said, okay, after $3 million of research and prototype creation, we're just going to call it and go with something. And that's essentially what you would have had to do. But now, because we were able to dial in the exact look by doing all the prototyping in the virtual space, we're able to come up with the results and get the result at the end. And then at the end of the day, you have a, I'll just go ahead and mute this. You have a really an interesting lens design that is, different than the regular Supreme Prime Radiance, in the sense that it might have different coatings and a different look, but essentially the exact same lens, right? So the same glass, the same lens design, same everything, same optical design. The only difference between the Supreme Prime and the Radiance is the formulation of the coating and how we chose it, creating the special flare characteristics that you see here. Very, very customized. This is not something that happened overnight. It's definitely took some time to create, but it's very specialized, and that's why the look is so special at the end of the day. But already this has been used on Fargo season 4, so you can watch the trailer of Fargo online right now. There's a lot of video content on our website, zeiss.com/Cine, CINE, and you can go to the Radiance page there. You can see this comparison video, which we're seeing here. You could see a video with Rodrigo Prieto interview and his short film R&R that will play in the background in just a second, that also shows the lens characteristics and how they can be used. There's a short film, All Blood Runs Red, which you can watch. And of course, the trailer for Fargo season 4, and there's more content coming as well very shortly, because we're starting to see the Radiance already being used in the field. So yeah. But Brandon, I think at this point, like, are there any questions that you have that we can start off with?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first off, thanks for the presentation. That's fantastic. I mean, it's really great to see kind of understand the flare characteristics and the interaction of the glass, and also the coating element and what actually goes into that, and the negative effects you can get from uncoated lenses that you may not want. It's great also to see ZEISS's understanding of the market and kind of blending the technical side with the creative side to give a product that that the industry wants. So I absolutely applaud ZEISS for that. I think you guys have done a phenomenal job in that regard. I did have a question. I mean, a couple questions, but since we're on the topic of the flare characteristics and the coating. You're showing a comparison of the ZEISS Supreme and the ZEISS, Supreme Radiance. With the ZEISS Radiance, do they match? Could a cinematographer use both on one show and both sets basically? And will they intercut with each other minus the flare? Or is that something that, they should, pick one and go with it? If they've got B, C, or D units and things like that, they may not be able to get a second or third set of the lenses with Radiance, with the Supreme suffice.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's what we saw actually even on Fargo season 4 with Dana Gonzalez. He didn't have a 21 available at the time because when he first began the show, Kessler didn't have those lenses delivered. They came a little bit later. So he used a Supreme Prime regular 21. And I think even on the longer side, maybe the 135, I want to say too, he used a couple of times. You could easily match between regular and Radiance. I have another presentation somewhere that shows the difference between the two. But essentially the Supreme Prime Radiance is just slightly warmer than the Supreme Prime. So it's not that much of a difference. It's a difference on the color temperature scale because we reflect back a small, what's it called? Small spectrum of that blue light. Because that gets reflected back, of course, everything else gets transmitted normally. So overall, the image is slightly warmer, but essentially you can match that in color correction with regular Supreme Prime and also CZ2 zooms. So the CZ2 zooms are compact zooms, what we call the cinema zooms at 15 to 30, 20 to 80, 70 to 200. Those, they all have the ability to match with one another because they tonally give a similar look. They might be off a little bit on the color temperature scale, depending on the focal length or something like that. But really they match with the look matches with one another. Supreme Prime and Radiance, very much so. The rest of the look, the bokeh, the out of focus details, the sharpness, all that's going to look the same to you, even the contrast levels.
Great. Okay. No, that's perfect. And I've got a couple other questions, but I want to kind of go around the room here, if you will. Tom, did you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Snehal. That was a great presentation. I just wanted to know, at what point does ZEISS even think of creating a new series of lenses? Like, how does that come about? Is it based on feedback that you get from the community? And in particular, when did large format first come onto your radar? I know your CP2s and CP3s, also cover, but in particular, the Supremes, how, why, when?
Well, so, we were ready for full frame in 2009. So yes, the CP2s are full frame, but so are the CZ2s. The cinema zooms are also full frame. So we were ready for it. And ZEISS is very much a R&D company. Think about this. We're 31,000 employees worldwide. We are in every single optical business you can think of, from NASA down to eyeglasses. And we're always in the forefront of trying to pay attention to what's the next new scientific development. We saw full frame as a viable option years before, cinema camera companies started manufacturing, right? And keep in mind, we had full frame with the 5D. So, we already have a revolution, and we had Red 1, and Red 1 was bigger. The sensor was bigger than Super 35. And everyone knew it. And this was already a push when the red one came out for having lenses that cover more. You remember clearly when red one was first introduced. I'm sure Brandon and others can tell you too, those people that were heavily involved in rental, it was a problem getting coverage on, because sometimes you could use a classic made for Super 35 lens, and even on the red one, it wouldn't work well. Today, we have that problem with the helium and the Gemini sensor at times as well. Sometimes you crop in a little bit to not get that vignette, you know, that you're getting with the classic lenses. So we already saw this problem and knew that this was the way to go. And that's why a big reason why the CP2s were successful, because of interchangeable mount system, number one, being able to put on any kind of camera system, and number two, the coverage. So it worked for a 5D out of the box, which meant back then, 2009, 2010, you were ready for the future. So when it came time to the next iteration, the relationship between ARRI and ZEISS changed a little bit over the years, because after Master Anamorphic, there was no project that they were working together on. And keep in mind, Master Anamorphic was a project that started by ZEISS, introduced to ARRI, and then they teamed up together, okay? So it's not like even then they had a partnership where they're developing a new lens together. Now it came time where ARRI wanted to go, or ARRI, depending on what part of the world you're in, wanted to go on their own, and they're doing more of a vertical business. It's not uncommon. It's very much, you know, something that was expected. I mean, they're making their own Steadicam systems, their own gimbals, filtration, right? They have their own neutral density filters. So they're doing all kinds of vertical stuff. So it made sense that they wanted to pursue their own lens line. At that time, you know, as I said, a choice. We can just stop and not make any more high-end cinema lenses, or we could have an offering of our own. And the idea was with the Supreme Primes, and you know, there's future projects as well, is that we should stay in cinema and offer products, because ZEISS has a reputation since 1910s for making cinema glass. There's no reason to get out of the business. There is a demand for what ZEISS can offer. And that's what was shown with the Supreme Primes. They're a product that did really well in the first year. We sold quite a few sets, and we still sell even today. We still have demand even during our, you know, times right now with the pandemic. We still have people asking about Supreme Primes and Radiance regularly. So we knew that there was a demand. We tried to get into the market at the right time. We had to come with the right product and the right introduction. And that's why the cinema team worldwide was formed, for the sales side of it, in terms of coming from people that understand the market, that are in touch with DPs, that can bring feedback. And even when we sat in the offices talking about the launch of the Supreme Primes, before they even were called Supreme Primes, trust me, at that time, years ago, we were talking about the other version of the lens. We were talking about Radiance before we even knew what it was. We were saying that, okay, we know that full frame is next. We know that this is going to be an important format. And we also know that the lens choices are limited in this format. So we need to have more than one option. So we try to pay attention to what the market wanted and what was saying to us. I mean, you go to any rental house, I mean, you look at the dynamic rental inventory, you have uncoated and coated super speeds. You have Cook speed Pancros, you have K35s. I mean, everything I mentioned, you guys have all these lenses. So we know that there's a demand for it. So we can't ignore that. And I think that's where we were really lucky that we have a company today in the modern day that's not very conservative, that will take a chance. And they luckily took a chance on this whole project with the Radiance and went for it. And I think that's a good thing, because DPs want choices. You know, when they come into a rental, so maybe not a dynamic, but when they go prep somewhere, man, DPs are pulling out stops. Like, they're pulling out every single lens set that Camtech or Keslo or Otto has, you know, or Panavision has. They're like asking Dan Sasaki like a million questions, like, well, what about this lens set? What about that lens set? They want to see everything. So, I mean, I haven't been to a prep recently where there's a new show or something and the DP hasn't had like 10 sets, you know, sitting around testing everything. We just want to be amongst that 10 set. Now, if we have two different sets that are being tested that day instead of one, that's twice as many chances as getting that job. So it makes sense to have choices. It makes sense to pay attention to what people want and give it to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the future lineup of ZEISS. I'm kind of curious, does that include any Radiance zooms?
Maybe. There's all kinds of stuff coming, which we can't talk about. But
Of course not. Of course not.
yeah, but you know, just that line of thinking. Are we always thinking of the next thing? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And at any time now in the future, now we have this tool set available to us with the Radiance, and also XD technology, the metadata technology, which is really taking off. because we're providing metadata, lens metadata, to help visual effects and volumetric shooting and AR and all these new AR walls, and the way that the TV show Mandalorian was shot with virtual walls, for sets. We're in that space, and we're providing information that is critical to making that workflow even easier and more straightforward. So yes, every time we have new lens technology, we can now apply it onto any future product that we have.
Yeah, makes sense. We did have a question come in. Oh, sorry. We did have real quick, a question come in via Facebook Live from Jesse Calderon. And he asked, how do you go about finding a cinematographer in a project to test out new lenses?
Yeah, so like, I think it was specifically about Rodrigo. How did we get Rodrigo Prieto involved? Well, we know a lot of cinematographers, of course, working in this space, right? We're in contact with a lot of people. Rodrigo wanted to learn more about the Supreme Prime lenses, so he came to visit us at our office, and we have common colleagues and friends. So, I've met him a bunch of times before and chatted with him a bunch, but this was a time when he was actually coming in for a one-on-one demo. So it was a great opportunity just to hang out with him and get to know him. And we were looking for a cinematographer to test out the Radiance and to do a project so that we can use it as a test bed to talk about and launch, the Radiance. And what we do is, if you've noticed with our Supreme Prime Reel too, is we target cinematographers that are really high end and give them a little bit of budget to play with to create something that's very personable, that has a story based. We don't want to do lens tests that's just a flat set, someone sitting there with lights on them, because nothing in the real world that we shoot looks like that. Everything looks like, in our TV shows and movies, everything looks like a story. So if you notice that even our reels that we did for Supreme Primes, we really try to concentrate on story, and that's what we asked all our filmmakers to do. So we asked Rodrigo the same question, is like, hey, would you be interested in doing this film-based or story-based project? Now, keep in mind, Rodrigo's been shooting ZEISS lenses for many, many years. I mean, he's used Master Primes, tons, and Master Anamorphics, and he's used, even in the DNA lenses he used with the Alexa 65. There's some ZEISS lenses in there too, and he has a long history with ZEISS. So he's very excited at initially because of the brand, and is interested in seeing what this is all about. But then he looked at the lenses and it blew him away. So he's like, okay, this is a cool thing. This is different. This is interesting. And it's a tool that we can use. I might not use it on every project. And he was very honest about it. He said, I might not use it on every project, but the ones I do, I know I'm going to use this technique, and I can pull from it, and it could become this paintbrush for me. So I'm very excited. And then he pitched this story, R&R, and this mini short film that we shot, that I was just showing the interview from. And he went all in. He was the DP, he was the director, he wrote it. He sent a beautiful lookbook with great imagery showing exactly what he's trying to capture in the moods. And it was interesting to be able to work with him. Now, I admire his work a lot, and I know a lot of you do too. I mean, this is the guy that shot Brokeback Mountain and Wall Street, right? So, and then of course, The Irishman. So he's the cool ass dude, first of all. Really cool to hang out with. Very, very much an artist, right? Very much thinking from more the artistic sense of it than the technical side of it. It was just amazing to see his kind of process of how he took the story, formulated it, how he used the lens effects and the flare characteristics, very cognizant of how he's using it and putting it together. And at the very end, we came out with a high-end piece that we could all be proud of, and that really showed off the lens. And then he came with us to Camera Image in Poland and helped us launch the product too, and did a Q&A. We showed a short film in the theater, in the big screen event. He's just a wonderful, wonderful person. We found that all the cinematographers we work with are just great people, all the men and women out there. And it's not an easy industry to be a part of. The job of a cinematographer is taxing. It's eye straining, it's tiring. You work a lot of times in a warehouse, 10 hours a day, in a dusty warehouse. We're aware of this. So being able to say to them, hey, we're going to give you a chance to do something creative on your own, no rules. Paul Cameron had a great time doing a piece for the Supremes, John Joffin, Laura Marians, Sergei Saldivar, these are all like from the Americas that we used, we partnered up with, and we love doing that. because being able to see what their artistry is, what their storytelling is, it's like, that's why we do this. That's why we do this job, is to be able to let people tell their story. So like, you know, Dana Gonzalez, for example, example of why he was using the lenses for Fargo season 4. It's only because I saw him at a party. I was at the 100-year anniversary party of the ASC, and I knew, I had heard from Brad Wilson at Keslow that Dana's going back and he's going to do season 4 of Fargo. And we knew it was shot in Chicago. Colette is the manager there at the Keslow office there. So I knew all this going into it. I see him there. I'm like, you know what, Dana, you love the Supreme Primes and you like to mess with filtration and stuff. What if you had a lens that you didn't have to filter and it could still create a cool look for you? And the resulting fact is that it creates a warmer tone overall. He's like, what are you talking about? I said, I'll send over some lenses for you to test. He was flying out the next day to go to Chicago to test with Supremes, regular Supremes, and he was going to use them on the show. He's like, I'm ready to go. I love Supremes. I used them on Legion already. He's in love with the lens, loves the combination with the Sony Venice camera. So I'm just going to go for it, right? And then, so what ended up happening is that we sent him the lens from Keslow the next day. They got overnighted. He tried them out and just fell in love and just wanted to use them. So that's exactly the kind of result we wanted, was that an artist just tried a paintbrush and just loves it.
Yeah, wow, that's great. Sean, did you have a question? I think you're just on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I was having a problem with mute. Well, great presentation. Certainly at the back of the queue, and a lot of my questions have been answered. I mean, but I do have one in particular, as obviously, you know, with COVID and having not had NAB, so to speak, it's customary that most manufacturers would kind of showcase something at NAB or Cinegear. Was there anything that you guys had in particular planned for NAB, or have you kind of shifted that down the line?
So the big thing that we had planned for NAB was the Radiance lenses. Actually, we actually had a special room already planned to showcase the lenses, and we were going to have a prop from NASA, because we were involved with, if you guys remember 50 years ago with the moon landing, it was our lenses on the Hasselblad cameras that got the first images of the moon. So we still have lenses on the moon itself. So we were going to have an astronaut suit and a cool set, and you could take your photograph with it with the Radiance lens, all that stuff planned. But don't worry, we're putting something else together to do just that, to talk about new stuff. And there's other new stuff in the regular Supreme Prime line that we want to talk about as well, in terms of the new focal lengths that we're introducing. So yes, we're putting stuff together. It'll be exciting. It'll be fun. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for asking for that. You know, but the two big things for us in the cinema world are, number one, the Radiance lenses, and number two, more focal lengths from Supremes, which we've been promising. We're completing our 14 lens set. So there's going to be 14 lenses in the set, not 13, from 15 to 200. Right now, 10 of those lenses are already available, from 21 to 150. You can get 10 of the focal lengths, but 4 more are on the way. So we're going to talk about that too. So all that will come together in a presentation that's forthcoming that we're working on.
And then lastly, kind of obviously with the situation, the lead times on any of the orders, are you able to fulfill them, or are we simply just going to move the lead time forward by the period of
No, Radiance lenses are available now, because we did start shipping them before we went into lockdown, at least in New York and LA. Before anything happened, we already got our shipments in. So we do have some stock available. So shipping is easy. If you ordered today, if you were taking delivery today of a set that you ordered, we can get it to you fairly quickly. We have had some rental houses holding off right now, which is understandable because of what's going on. So that's why we have some stock right now at hand. But lead time normally, because we passed the date, which was March of when we started shipping them, we've already manufactured a number of them, not all the lenses, but we've manufactured a number of them. We can ship fairly quickly with the Radiance. And with the new focal lengths of lenses, it's going to be our normal lead time, 6 to 8 weeks. So not at worst 3 months. We're not seeing anything past 3 months. Even with a high volume of orders, we're able to fulfill pretty quickly. We've really dialed down the system of forecasting and production to get to this point. We really tried hard. We no longer have a third-party player in between, an OEM player as well. Before, it used to be a two jump. You know, we'd make the lens, like a master prime, goes to ARRI, ARRI tests it. They might reject it, send it back. If not, they'll forward it to their market. Someone in the market will test it. They might reject it and send it back. And if it gets that far, it might go to Otto Nemens and he might send it back because Dan's not happy with it. You never know. So now we have a much more straight path. Manufacture, test at the factory, send to us. Our customers test, like our dealers test. And then if they're okay with it, generally almost every rental house is fine with it. We've had a very few complaints with the Supreme Prime line, and any adjustments that had to be made, we were able to make. Able City does house our warranty service center. So if you do get a set of Radiance lenses and you guys, your lens techs put it on a projector, you're like, oh, wait a minute, the focus is uneven between the right and left side. It's a 20-minute job at Able to fix that because we have the right tools. So it's much quicker than it used to be. Manufacturing is faster, delivery is quicker, less people in the middle of the process to get you the lens.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Coda, I believe Coda has a question as well.
So to keep going on the analogy of the paintbrush, so now we have this beautiful blue colored paintbrush. Has ZEISS thought about adding any other colors to the palette, as far as maybe a lens that can give off magenta flares or more greenish flares?
So we probably will never do either of those two.
Okay.
I just mentioned, for the simple fact of the resulting effect that the lens would have. So let's say you did one that did magenta flares, right?
Mm-hmm.
The resulting is your skin tones are all going to look green. Everything's going to look green then, right? Because everything will transmit better except magenta. That'll be bounced back a little bit. It's the same thing as if you put a infrared hot mirror that's really intensely, reflecting a lot of infrared light back, and it'll end up reflecting a bunch of red near infrared as well. And then therefore you're going to get a resulting green image. So we're avoiding that altogether, or the reverse of doing a green flare and having a magenta image. That was actually in the playbook for creating the Radiance, that we would avoid these colors altogether. Okay.
Understood.
So that was just, and you saw in the development that some of the image colors did go to green, and we dialed it back to blue.
Mm-hmm.
So no, we don't want to do that. The blue characteristics are, again, research from feedback. So we looked at all the lenses that are popular, and the two things that we saw are blue flares and overall warmer skin tone is what the majority of cinematographers kind of turn to now. It might be subconscious or it might be consciously, but that's what they went towards. So we would avoid magenta green altogether. Other colors, it just depends. I mean, let's see how these do first before we find out, because it does take, as you saw from the presentation, it's a lot of development to get to that point. So there has to be a market for it. There has to be someone asking for it. And it can't be one customer. It has to be 100.
Right. And have you thought about adding a Radiance line to any of the other lines that ZEISS currently offers?
Sure. I mean, we want more feedback on that, and we want to see what people are looking for. But yeah, it's absolutely possible. Again, it takes R&D and some time, but yeah, it's possible to do that.
Awesome. Looking forward to seeing what comes out of it.
Cool.
And Snehal, in terms of the Super 35 versus full frame debate, all the lenses that are coming out of ZEISS currently are full frame lenses, and some camera manufacturers are going to start coming out with a Super 35 camera, where obviously they're also pushing forward with full frame as well. I'm kind of curious on your thoughts and ZEISS's direction with the Super 35 versus full frame debate. Should we ever expect Super 35 lenses to be released from you in the future, or is the direction staying with full frame? How do you see the market playing out in terms of the two?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to go, the other way in terms of going back to making Super 35 specialty lenses, unless there was a market for it. Because at this point, we have enough offerings already in the market, right? Because you can get ultra primes, master primes, high speeds, super speed Mark 1, 2, 3, T21s. There's so many different lenses for Super 35 that really doesn't make sense to try to compete with ourselves in that market. So I don't think that's viable, let's say. And another fact is, I'm going to share my screen so you can see this. The other fact is that the full frame lens will work for Super 35, but just not the other way around, right? So a lens that's made for full frame, like on the left side, a lens that's made to cover a larger sensor, could easily cover sensors that are smaller. So you can use the Supreme Primes. And by the way, the Supreme Primes have been used a lot in 4K in Venice, on Alexa Mini, regular Alexa SXT, even Helium or Gemini. So you've already seen smaller sensor size cameras using the lens. It's just because the DP likes the look of the lens, you know. So it's a different flavor of ZEISS lens. It's a newer coatings. It's a different lens optical design. So it's a different flavor. So that means that it's a viable option for a lot of different people. A lens that's made for a smaller sensor, it might not porthole exactly like we're seeing on the right side. Maybe it's more of a vignette, it's more of a gradient, but essentially the lens that's made for a smaller sensor was never qualified for a larger sensor. So it would be more difficult for that kind of lens to be used on a large sensor. Yes, certain focal lengths maybe, right? Like on the Master Prime line, there are certain focal lengths that quote unquote cover full frame and then do a pretty decent job, but you're not going to get a lot of focal length choices amongst the lens set. Whereas the Supreme Prime or the Radiance, every single focal length, CP3, CZ2 zoom, all of these, every single one of them will cover this larger sensor. So we don't yet see the need to go back. And if you look at the current kind of buying, habits of people right now, they're only getting lenses for larger format. You know, we can clearly see, because we are a company that still manufactures Super 35 glass, Ultra Prime, Master, Anamorphic. We can see the numbers, you know, like the sales just really tapered off quite a bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. Also, we had a question come in via Facebook Live, and that was from Zach Hunter. Are you able to expand upon volumetric filmmaking and what qualities and advantages your lenses bring to that process?
Oh yeah, of course, absolutely. It's because of the XD technology. So what I'll do is I'm going to just open up the web page so that you guys can see what I'm talking about, and then just go research on your own when you get a chance. So you can go to zeiss.com/cine, C-I-N-E, and then from there, you know, let me just show you my screen. Share screen. There we go. Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So here, you know, we have, you can just do a quick jump. I'm just going to show you. Just type in Cine like that, zeiss.com/Cine. It takes you straight to the cinematography page. And here you can see about full frame, large format. So lenses for large format, lenses for Super 35, and then extended data. So I'm going to go to the extended data link right over here and click on that. And that's going to open up a different page altogether. So what this extended data is that we're using the Cook/I protocol. And we're allowing this lens to communicate either through an external port or through the back of the lens, because it has pins in the back. And what happens is, normally, this is the type of information right here that you would normally do in a smart lens. So any kind of Cook/I lens, or even an Arri LDS lens, essentially they have lens name, focal length, calibrated focusing distance, calibrated t-stop value, depth of field calculation, horizontal field of view, entrance pupil position. These are all pieces of info that are in real time communicated from the lens to a camera system or to an external device. ZEISS is adding distortion and shading characteristics. So the bend, like in this case, if you look at my image right now, I'm on a wide angle lens on a Mac, and this lens has quite a bit of distortion. So the shelf behind me looks like it's bending quite a bit, you know? So that bend, how much degree of bend is there? And the bend changes. So like in the middle of the frame, there's hardly any bending at all. And as I get out further and further to the edges of the frame, the bending happens more and more, because there's more distortion here than there is over here. So what is that distortion? And then what is the shading? Meaning that, what is the difference in exposure from center to edge when I open up the lens all the way or when I close down? Because it changes over time as you use different t-stops. So all that information is tracked. And then on set, you can actually record that information either in a camera or with an external device. And then in post-production, you can use it to do different things. So for volumetric filming specifically, what you would do is you can stitch together. So I can have, you know, an array of 8 cameras all next to one another. And normally what would happen was I would have to overlap those cameras quite a bit. Maybe a whole 1/3 of the image I would have to overlap, because I would have such fall off difference depending on my t-stop that, you know, I would get it from brighter to darker on each image. And when I stitch it together, it'll be a distinct line between each image. But what I can do is I can get rid of that shading altogether, get rid of the distortion, and flatten it out, the image. And then when I stitch it together, now I could form a whole wall of 6 or 8, frames across, and it would be nice and flat. So for volumetric filming, this is very important because you're taking cameras, and I'm gonna go back to my screen so you can just see me doing these gestures, but basically, you're basically going around, right? In volumetric filming, you have an object or objects in the middle. You have an array of cameras on the outside, and you're filming all at the same time at this object. And so then you get all the different faces, the facets of this object, and be able to create a 3D object out of it, right? So this person can be scanned in this way. And even if I move or talk or something, all that is scanned in real time from maybe an array of 50 cameras around me. And this can be turned into now I can turn it into a 3D object for a video game or for a movie or something like that. Now, the easiest thing to do is use the least amount of cameras as possible, the least amount of optics, the least amount of information, because the more camera angles you have, the more information you have to process. So if I have 8 camera angles instead of 50, and they could all be stitched together very clean, it's going to be very, very efficient. And that's what we're able to do in real time, is take away the shading and distortion characteristics. So even in real time, the AI can recognize all these images and stitch them together quite easily. We already do this in photography. If you use Lightroom and you wanted to do a panorama image, you already have the plugins in Lightroom that will get rid of the shading, distortion, even chromatic aberration of your lens and stitch everything together. That's because in Lightroom, they carry all the profiles of all the major lens manufacturers. So even ZEISS Lenses, the lens profiles carried there. So the overall look of the lens, depending on what f-stop it's at, is programmed in Photoshop and in the raw and in Lightroom and in the raw encoder or the raw software from Adobe. But in film, we need a little bit more fidelity because we're not talking about a still image. We're talking about a motion, 24 frames a second at least, right? So in that case, now we have to make sure that we have dynamic information. So depending on exactly what focus and iris position I'm at, it's going to change my overall shading and distortion characteristics. And I want to have that real-time information for every frame of video. And that's what the XD technology does. And so not only does it help you for volumetric filming, but for compositing and workflow. So you could record on set and then you could include in post-production. And we have Nuke and After Effects plugins to be able to apply the stuff. So After Effects would be a program that you would use maybe to create a wall. And now you can do that. You can do volumetric. In After Effects, you have a free plugin. And if you need a specialized application, we're open to it. Send us an email and we'll create a special SDK for you. And you could put it into your workflow without having to have one of the plugins that we have. All the resources are here. So we have training if you want to use XD technology, even depending on your camera system like DSMC2. We have white papers here and we have free tools. So we have free injection tools to be able to inject that data into your OpenEXR files for visual effects workflow. And we have free plugins for Nuke and After Effects. All this stuff is available, already being used by HBO, Amazon, and other production companies to do their work. And again, you don't have to, you can use an external box. So here, Christoph is showing you the different workflows, and he will actually show you how to use a Transvideo Starlight monitor or use an external box, the Master Locket Plus, to transfer the data as well. So there's different ways and methods how you can make this happen. The Sony Venice and the Red DSMC2 bodies record this information automatically. So if you're using them, you already have the info. You don't have to worry about it. So the Sony Venice in RAW format or the least amount of compression, and DSMC2 if you're using our 3D files.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. It's really interesting to know what that XD, that extended data, can give you or save you time, via post. But just the fact that you're kind of mapping out the shot via data, right, giving you that data is pretty incredible. So I think, as we move forward in the future, there will be applications that we're not even aware of now that will be able to simplify the process in film, in a certain aspect of filmmaking, or unlock other potential that we're not even aware of. So I think that's great that ZEISS has kind of incorporated that into their lenses. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Snehal. I want to be cognizant of everybody's time here. We're over by 5 minutes on the projected time slot that we have, and we've been so appreciative of the partnership that I really feel like we have with you and ZEISS, and maintaining those latest and greatest projects. And what I got a lot out of this presentation is, you took the creativity and the art side of it, and that was going to Keslow and understanding what that customer really wants. And then you applied the math and the science to be able to go out and achieve that in an efficient way. It is such a unique thing, specifically with your lenses, because, the Supremes were made for the masses, right? The Supreme Radiance are still made for the masses, but it gives the masses an extra option. And that optionality is what we find to be, hopeful in our value to other rental companies who own many sets of lenses, and they own many sets of, many different cameras, but they might not, they might still need to provide additional optionality to their customer. So we're here for them, so that they never have to turn down a job, and they can always give the creative the tools that they need to create the image and the look that they want. So it's been overall a super helpful conversation, and I think hopefully the audience got something out of it, and we're very grateful to be able to have these conversations with you, and yeah, we're certainly looking forward to continuing to work closely together.
I think you're on mute, Snehal.
Thanks for having all of us here, Austin, and putting this together. We really appreciate it. We're here to help the community, and like you said, to help the customers at the end of the day, and to make sure that the cinematographers have the tools available to them that they're looking for. So if anyone wants more info, they can go to zeiss.com/cine to see all the resources that we talked about today. The presentation that we talked about, specifically the development of the ZEISS Radiance, is on lenspire.zeiss.com. That's Lenspire is, I'm just gonna spell it out over here in the chat, and maybe you guys can put it elsewhere, but it basically allows you to see different stories from different cinematographers of using ZEISS lenses, master primes, ultra primes, super speeds, CP2s, CP3s, Supremes, Radiance in different projects. So the blog is really a great repository for that. But thank you so much for everything. And just once again, there's 7 lenses in the Radiance line: 21, 25, 29, 35, 50, 85, and 100. There are approximately around 23,000 each altogether for each lens times 7. And you have to buy the whole set together to invest in it, so that everyone has the same set. It'd be really easy to sub-rent, and you guys are in that business, to sub-rent to people, because if you have one set and a TV show comes in or a commercial comes in, they're like, we need 2 or 3. It'll be easy to get the same matching set from somebody else, unlike just about every other lens system that's out there. So yeah, that's the skinny on that.
That's perfect. Well, thank you so much, Snehal. It's fantastic to see you as always, and we love staying connected with everybody, with our customers, but also with our vendors, such as ZEISS as well. So thank you for all your support, and we look forward to working with you guys as we come out of this.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it. Thank you so much for all of this.
Yes,
Thanks,
thank you,
Snehal.
sir. Much appreciated.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks
Have
for
a good one.
joining.
Yes, thanks for having us.